So today we're going to be talking about false domestic violence claims, false accusations, pretty much of any kind, but how do we defend those in court, and especially if we're preparing for a hearing right around the corner. Now I'm going to tell you it's Halloween, so I got these. If somebody knocks, well, they're just going to interrupt. My kids are out trick-or-treating with their mom, so I figured why not do this? Now we're going to talk about how do we prepare for trial, how do we organize evidence. We're going to give a lot of different resources to other videos that I have. And if you're in this, I just want to tell you there's nothing simple about it, but I'm going to make it as simple as possible and easy to follow for you because this is really my dedication. If you don't know me, I'm Steve Maeda. I have the largest and longest running community of dads who have won and only high conflict custody. I've been doing this for about 20 years. And as you probably know, this is not legal advice. I can't really give that, but I'm gonna share with you the experience of what we know in our groups, our communities of every single day of the week, working through this with men. So let's get started. I'm making this video because I got an email today and I get many emails and messages and I really try and get through all of them, but it's mathematically impossible at times. And of course, I want to keep this anonymous. So there's a restraining order filed. They believe that that other party is provoking them in this. So they're creating the conflict. They're doing it to disenfranchise the other party, to create parental alienation, to turn the child against their other parent. There's multiple DV claims. There's also criminal claims. The court has ordered supervised visitation. The supervisor is a family member. Now, oftentimes because of this, visitations are canceled due to a bias or they don't want to get in any more trouble. At least that's how I think I understand it. This comes from a loose email, so I don't have all the details. So what they did was they hired a private third party, a monitor, to watch the supervised visits. That monitor has brought up parental alienation, gaslighting, and all sorts of different things. The family is frustrated. They're scared. The family wants answers, and their hearing is right around the corner. It's within a week. They're trying to gather evidence, and evidence that can tell many, many different narratives, and they are overwhelmed by the family court system. Now, although the details of that you may not be able to relate with, but there's going to be aspects of it that you know very well. And within this, there are things that consistently come to me that I want to clean up, that families, you, whoever's going through this, can start to fix if you're in a situation like this. So here, there's the idea of parental alienation. There's multiple false allegations. There's multiple allegations of domestic violence. They're saying some of it's criminal. They're saying some of it is in the family court. There's canceled visitations. They're desperate. And their hearing date is coming up. Now, there's so many areas in here where people screw up and lose parenting time, continue parental alienation, not because they're bad parents or they're foolish or not smart. It's because they're ignorant to the process and understanding how it works, and they're so reactive. So you're having a truly unjust thing done to you, and it's really easy to react. We all start there, but we have to get out of there. So first and foremost, I'm recording this obviously on October 31st, 2025, but in the month of October, I've done about 20 hours of live streams, and a lot of them cover this. Now, one of my last live streams, preparing for family court, is one of the best ones, and towards the end of it, it's gonna be extremely helpful in this. Now, that's already up on YouTube, but I plan on editing it into smaller chunks to make it easier to follow, but I'll leave a link down below, or maybe at the end of this video, where you can find, just the wealth in that. You know what? I'm gonna turn on some of these lights. We'll see how this looks. Man, changing stuff all over the map. Principle one we're gonna learn here is we need to take chaos and put it into order. Now, in family law, there's almost always an urgency. But you need to understand if you react emotionally, you set yourself up to lose. So you're going to need to learn how to react, think fast, be calculated in this situation. But if you rely on it and you learn that trait, you think that's what's going to help you win it. It's going to eventually make you lose, and it could very well make you lose this time. So oftentimes you have the same judge in family law. And so this is really about building a relationship with the court, even if you do switch judges. This is really, really important. So we need to take our emotional reactivity, and our goal isn't to ignore the crisis or minimize it in any way, but we need to start translating that into the language of the courts. Now, down below, I will put a video that breaks this all down for you. We're gonna cover that language thoroughly. We're gonna learn the process, we're gonna learn about evidence, and we're gonna learn about etiquette. In fact, there's gonna be something else down there that tags evidence. And this is important because in the email that I got from these guys, their evidence is all over the place. We're gonna talk about this in a second. Now, also another thing happening when we're under the gun and we're in chaos, we have criminal charges against us, we have to look at what is actually being decided here. So what are we going to court for? Within the email I got, there's a lot of different stuff, and it's giving me stories about what's happened. And this is how the family's communicating. This is how you're communicating with your friends. This is where all of us start, but we have to unlearn that and learn a different way of communicating these points of that there are lies happening and so on. We have to do that in the language of the courts, and we have to do that the way the court wants, and if we don't, we will just tank ourselves. Also, if you're working with attorneys, it's gonna screw everything up with them as well. You're gonna raise your rates, you're gonna make them mad, you're gonna act out of emotion with them, and it would just be better off if you learned all this stuff before walking into an attorney's office, because it'll make it easier for them to hear your case, you could get along with them better. Building a relationship with a good attorney is a good thing. Building any relationship with a bad attorney is a bad thing. This brings us to principle 2, argue the right thing. With false allegations, with parental alienation, with families being divided, and all sorts of horrible things said back to one another, it is really easy to bring that argument into family court, and you don't want to do that. You want to bring the right argument into family court. But I mean something a little bit deeper than that. So many people come to me, and please, let me just tell you, you gotta learn this. What is on the top of your court order? What are you going to court for? What are the specific arguments happening? So for instance, if parental alienation is happening, but you're going into a temporary orders hearing or a criminal hearing, maybe it's a temporary orders for a parenting plan, or it's a temporary orders for a protective order. You have to argue that exact thing. And if you bring up things which are irrelevant to that, for instance, if it's about child support and visitation and you're bringing up parental alienation and not addressing child support and visitation, you are going to make the court really mad. You're bringing chaos to order. Now, so many people think here that the other side, let's say that's your ex-wife or partner, or maybe it's the father of the children, and they're the ones who originally made the claims, they're the plaintiff in this, they're being loud, they're bringing up all sorts of different things, they're interrupting. You cannot do that. And please, again, watch my videos down below on the family court process. We need to bring it back to process. This is gonna be our advantage. This is how the guys win who have won in the highest of conflict cases win in my groups. We teach to go in the process. It's really hard. I know it's hard. Nobody does it perfectly, but it's always the best center to move towards. Start out in chaos, move into order. So let's look at this really quick. What hearing are you in? What's on the top of whatever you were served with? What is the relief you're asking for? So for instance, if you can't see your child and they're asking for supervised visitations and they want a monitor to be a specific person from the family, you're asking for a private monitor. Now, a little bit of family court strategy in this. I would talk to your attorney about this, but ask if that monitor could be court appointed so that monitor is used to working within the courts. More importantly, I'd involve a GAL or get that process started. Oftentimes people don't like using GALs or certain third parties, custody, coordinators, evaluators, and so on. But if you're in high conflict, they're some of the best people to introduce because they're going to be the best witnesses. Whatever is in their report is going to either help or hurt you. So the real question is how do we interview with GALs? How do we interview with court-appointed therapists? How do we interview with court-appointed anything, CPS included, law enforcement, and so on. Now, while that's covered in other videos, I'm planning on making a specific one probably in the next week or so on that. Get on my email list so you can be on the live streams and chat directly with me on that. Let's get back to the notes here. So in looking at what specific relief do we want, what direction do we want to go in, we also need to look at what evidence is there. How do I prove this? How do I make that argument in the way that the court cares? Now, I know you may be under the gun in this, but you're going to win by strategy and you're not going to win by emotion. And your emotion that's distracting you and making you think all over the place, it's going to make you lose. And this is one of the ways. It makes you argue the wrong thing. You bring chaos into order, and you start justifying the other party's chaos is your reason to maintain it, or we're thinking that's going to make you win. The longer you are in family court, the more you need to go towards order, and the more chaos is going to stop working. It might start working. It might be the thing that moves the case towards false allegations, which is horrible. I get that. But order is the way. Now, one last thing that I want to talk about here about arguing the wrong thing is parental alienation was brought up in this email thread. And I said, well, you got to see if your court recognizes it. I got a reply back saying, well, how do I know? They said they had access to court records, LexisNexis, they could work with an attorney. If you got a couple days, this is a tough one. But if you had, let's say, 6 weeks, that's a little bit more time to figure this out. So let me break that down, and let me break down the Hail Mary 5-day approach to studying this. You should watch family court, you should watch your judge. your state and county are going to have the most similar rulings, right? And your judge is going to have, of course, the most consistent rulings. So you want to watch your judge. But other judges are going to be fairly similar to that judge because they're working within the same county, the same set of boundaries. But I'll also say this, you watch any family court, even if it's in a different state, in a different county, you're going to learn something. You're going to learn a lot more from really anything else. That is just the best way. So you're going to see parental alienation brought up. You're going to see narcissistic abuse brought up. You're going to see a bunch of different things brought up, and you're going to see it argued wrong and right. Now, parental alienation, which I have another live stream that very much breaks that down. A little bit slow paced, but a good one. In fact, I got the most emails about that one. Link down below. Now, parental alienation isn't diagnosed. It isn't something that is, we'll say, easily diagnosed. It's a new thing. It's not in the DSM-5. There's a lot of judges that don't have laws towards it, and they can't diagnose it either. This is why you need a third party to do that. If you were to show parental alienation, usually how we see it, and we have guys win it, and our biggest wins are from the worst parental alienation that you probably cannot imagine, of guys winning full custody after that, having their kids taken away for years, and the worst kind of abuse. You should really watch my video because I talk about it there. We have a lot of experience with this. But in each case, it's new, and oftentimes those men set precedent in their courts, meaning parental alienation was never a thing until their case came. They started it, which is really an awesome thing because guys in my group have helped change the laws in their state and county. But they're gonna need things like guardian ad litem's, they're gonna need things like psych evaluations, they're gonna need things like a custody evaluator, and they're gonna need attorney knowledge that knows how to argue that. For instance, be able to argue psychological damage and abuse towards a child, or I guess it depends on the angle that you're going for, on certain forms of psychological abuse that are already documented that aren't parental alienation that can then paint a picture of that. These cases are long, they're terrible, they're hard, but to say they're impossible to win, man. If you heard the stories from my guys, they rewrote a lot of stuff. In fact, one of them was just on the call that we had today, the Halloween call. So if you're blitzing for your case and you have like 3 days, 5 days to prepare, you need to ask other attorneys, has this judge ruled upon parental alienation? And they should know. They may not know if they haven't been in front of the judge that much. There's all sorts of variables. But parental alienation is something many parents bring up, and it's very rare that it can be brought up is anything that the courts have really heard ruled upon or have case law pointing to it, unless they're in my guys' counties, because they won those cases and it took them years. Now, that being said, you get disappointed and you say the courts are unfair. No, that's just a wall. We have to figure out a different way to argue this. There's psychological damage being done, and how do we do it? And again, more than likely, if you don't have GALs, if you don't have court-appointed therapists, so not your therapist or a therapist, somebody that knows the courtroom procedure, hopefully has worked with the judge or people within the courts before. If you don't have custody evaluators, if you don't have third-party professionals that understand the system and have worked with the children, you, the other parent, for a long period of time, psychological abuse of any kind is very hard to argue. But if that is happening and you want to stop it, you need to start now and start thinking, how do I start working with third parties in the right way? How do I interview properly? How do I avoid mistakes that people make? How do I not talk trash on the other parent? And like I said, this is brought up in many videos that we have, and I'm gonna make some videos isolated for exactly this. Principle 3, disorganized evidence kills good cases. Now, the other day, I heard an attorney talk about how there were these text messages sent and it was, you're bad and evil and all these different things. And then at the very end, the person replied, but you're an a-hole or something like that. Now, he was a Texas attorney and he was talking about how that could be considered harassment and be grounds for a protective order, but his client just screwed it all up by replying back. That's an example of us screwing up good evidence, but the most common way people screw up good evidence is by not filing it properly, having it disorganized, not speaking the language of the courts, and just kind of like dumping it like it's a big box of hoarder material and expecting justice to be sorted out with that. And look, that makes sense. This is what I thought about 20 years ago, and this is what so many people start with, but we have to unlearn that. This is where I'm really gonna recommend you go down to the show notes after watching this video, or I'll definitely put a link to this part, but I'll put a link to a video where I talk about organizing evidence, and I'll even timestamp it for you so you go to the exact spot. So you have screenshots, you have witness testimony, you have video, you have body cam, you have emotionally fueled statements, and none of it has a structure. So first and foremost, we need a timeline. So the courts, lawyers, anybody working with you to help you on this case, including myself, if you end up hiring me or coming to my groups, Put your evidence in chronological order. It'll make it so much easier for everybody helping your case to see exactly what's going on. Now, evidence also needs to be verified by the court. So you should go down to your county clerk's office and find out what that means, or you can go to their website, or you can type into ChatGPT, but please double, triple check that. Check it in Gemini, check it in Google itself. Check it in Claude, but make sure you're right because this is your case and it all leans on you. You're responsible for it. How do you verify evidence? What's the process for that in family court? What's the process for that in criminal court? What would be the process for that in Travis County, Texas, in a domestic violence case? Now, then we need to connect the evidence to the claims. So there's claims being made. Here's the evidence, we have to argue it, and what does that evidence say? Now, this is where it gets a little bit tricky, and there's a huge value to what happens within my groups, because I can tell you this all day long. I can link to the videos down below, but you need to walk somebody through this. Or you don't need to, but it's really helpful. And part of that is it just gets so confusing and overwhelming when we look through our evidence, because it brings back all sorts of pain and trauma, makes us angry. And it's better to have attorneys or third parties, legal assistants, paralegals, good friends who understand how important this case is, go through that and build a case timeline, organize it in some sort of evidence binder, that's kind of what we'd call it, and then we need to prioritize it. We need to build the narrative of it. So this evidence means this. Does it definitively argue it, saying that this evidence proves that this did or didn't happen? Or does it just say it might not have happened? So if there's false allegations, it's always best if you have proof that it could not have happened. I'll also give you a little tidbit here, but if you watch my other videos, you'll get this. If you have witnesses that are character witnesses, this is a witness, but it's not the best witness. You need proof that this did not happen. That is the number one thing, and oftentimes we can't get that. In my false allegations series, it's a playlist. I'll link that one too. I really talk about this. This is really important. There's all sorts of reasons why you can't prove it, so then you need to really learn how to articulate this properly. It's a crazy thing. So what do? We organize evidence. Usually it's good to get third parties to help with that. Of course, attorneys that are familiar with working these types of cases. There's also a video, I'll put a link there too, of doing your due diligence to find a family law attorney. Man, that's one of the biggest ways people lose money and lose their cases. So we organize all the evidence, we say what it means, we have it already in a timeline, and then we build a narrative around it. All of that sounds like a lot, but if this is an important case to you and you're willing to do anything for your children, I'm just telling you what guys in my groups have done to win and what everybody's written off as impossible cases. I'd say it would be a good place for you to start. Which brings us to principle number 4, understanding the process and expectations. Winning in family court is not about emotions, it's about procedure. Yet it's for a highly volatile and emotional thing. And in this case, it's an emergency. It's happening right now and it's an assault upon you. Just know this, the court is going to reward correct process, the procedure in court, the etiquette in court, filing motions, respecting the court, being calm, being focused, and communicating properly. It's going to reward consistent documentation. This is what we teach in my communities. So if I forgot to say this at the beginning, here's the thing. I've been doing this for a long time and I've had communities for a long time and we have proof of people winning. My goal is to put out everything for free. I want to teach as much as I can about the process so that you could do it yourself, go pro se, get a lawyer. I'd always recommend almost always to get a lawyer. And there's videos on that too of why one would go pro se. You should really watch my stuff. But ours comes from proof of men in high conflict that win and lose. And we look at all of it. I started out losing, most of the guys in my group started out losing, and then we learned how to win. And then we started to build a culture and a community over almost 20 years of people that started out losing and then teach guys from the start how to win. Now, if you're coming here for false allegations, you're starting out defending, and you got to defend it if you want to bring things back to balance. And there's such a head game in it because so much of it's going to be unfair. Where does that unfairness take you? It builds a narrative that you have to lose. In fact, this is super important. This is probably the most important part. We have charted out how multiple men, like hundreds of men, have won starting out in seriously high conflict. What's consistent in all of that is there are multiple hearings that seem like losses, seem like unfairness, but there's little wins here and there. There's a relationship built between the judge or an attorney team that becomes a key factor that makes you win the impossible later. Long story short, there's always going to be a reason why you give up. And you may have to give up because you can't do it anymore. You ran out of money, you're mentally destroyed. You might have to be able to move on. I understand that. But we need to really assess what that is. We need to not rely on BS information about family law and just that it's horrible and you have to give up and lawyers suck and judges suck and everybody's terrible. The reasons why we quit most of the time, when I look at the case, my group looks at the case, you didn't have to quit. And if you're in my group, you realize how you can keep going. And it is hard. It eats you at the soul. So we need to make sure that that mental game stays in play. Get real information about what can happen. Don't buy into false hope. Don't ever think this is easy. Watch and study family court. Go to the courthouse. If you can't do that, watch live streams in Dallas County and Harris County. We have a lot of tools now, things like ChatGPT or Sentient Law. But don't think that's ever gonna make this easy for you. Fight on. Fight hard. Because you know what? When I was fighting for my case, when I was doing the impossible for me, there weren't people who helped, which is why I help. Now, even when I started helping men, I didn't really believe that I could have such an overwhelming amount of men who started out in high conflict win custody of their kids. I didn't think it would be possible, but they've done far better than me, and it's consistent. Multiple men every month win cases they came to me with saying that they thought they were broken and destroyed by. And if you're being parentally alienated, I want you to watch this video here. It was a live stream. I plan to cut it up and edit it into more efficient parts. If you want to watch the process and get really skilled, watch the one right above it. Free stuff in the show notes. We'll talk to you later. No trick-or-treaters. I'm that kind of house.